Hello, John.
Good evening, Danna. Nice to see you.
It's great to see you. And here we are again. I'm in Seattle. You're in New Hampshire. And it feels like we're practically in the same room.
It does indeed, yes. And we've probably got similar weather. It's about 40 degrees here and raining. Very
Well,
Seattle.
yes, that's exactly what ours is right now. And I was thinking about how you and I, just this time last year, no, yeah, this time last year, we did two live events in Seattle. And then in May, you and I did a video in which we talked about miracles and love in our lives and trusting in the unknown. And that was in
Right, we
May.
did, yeah.
Yes, and we had a lot of listeners and people that watched our video, and we plan to do some more, and we haven't because, well, life happened, and I had some
That's
things.
right. You've been busy.
Yes, and but I'm excited to be back, and I'm glad you're here. And so,
Thank you.
before we go any farther, John, would you mind telling, for the people that don't know you, although many people already do, tell us a little bit about you and your book, and your background, and where you were born, etc., so people understand that you do have an accent for a reason.
Oh, there you go. Yes, indeed. Well, hi, my name is John Smallman. I was born in England a long time ago. And in my youth, I had 10 years of Jesuit boarding school, which I absolutely detested. And so much so that I left before graduation because I just didn't want to go through all that nonsense. And my father was very understanding because he had been forced by his father to do a certain job. He became an attorney, which he didn't want at all. And so my dad was kind enough to pay for me to learn to be a pilot. And having learned to be a pilot, I became an airline pilot and did that for 42 years. And doing that, I lived in Jersey, which is a little island off the coast of France, which is basically English speaking. Then I was in Dublin, Ireland for 5 years, working for the national airline there. I came back to England and did 10 years with a charter company in England. Then I went out to Singapore, had a year there, and then came back closer to the UK to live in Kuwait, of all places. I had 13 years there, and fortunately was away on vacation in England when Kuwait was invaded in 1990. And as a result of that, my wife and I decided, hey, we don't really need to be in Kuwait any longer. So we moved on. I got a job with Japan Airlines and ended up my career living in Maui in Hawaii.
Wow.
So that was my career. And right about the 80s, I came across a channeled book by a woman called Jane Roberts. It was called Seth Speaks. It was lying on the coffee table in my parents-in-law's home. And I was waiting for my wife as she tarted herself up to go out with me. That was a nasty word to use, but never mind. As she got herself pretty to go out. And I picked up this book thinking, what a load of rubbish, and started to read it and couldn't put it down. And after that, I read all her books, read loads of other channel books, and came to the conclusion that it would be very nice to have my own spiritual guide or mentor with whom I could communicate. So in 1995, I sat down and a pen in hand, I said, Dear Lord, if there is somebody up there in the spiritual realms of high integrity who would like to come through, I'm willing and able. And immediately, words came into my mind, which I wrote down, and I got about 3 paragraphs, very welcoming, very loving, and no way the sort of message that I would have given myself. And so that's when I started channeling Saul, and I've been channeling him ever since 1995. And the last message I had from him was about 3 days ago, which I posted on my blog site. I kept it private initially because I didn't know quite what to do with it. And I got the hits that I should put some of it into a book. And then a friend said, really, John, you need to get those messages out in public. And I thought of self-publishing and magazine articles. And then, this was 2009, I heard about blogging. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I looked it up in Wikipedia somewhere. And then went out and bought Blogging for Dummies and set myself up with a WordPress blog. And I've been posting soul messages there since 2009. And in 2011, quite out of the blue, I got a sort of very faint intuitive hit that Jesus wanted to come through, which I dismissed as being my ego getting rather proud of doing a blog with Saul and, hey, let's have another one. And so I dismissed it, but it kept coming back and coming back. And after about a month, I finally sat down and said, okay, Jesus, if you really want me to channel, please give me a message. And he came through straight away. So since 2011, I've been channeling them both on a regular basis. And then in 2012, I started to read and record the messages they sent. So if you go to my blog site, and the easy way to find me is just to Google John Smallman, and you'll find it there right at the beginning. You can visit my blog site and you can either read the messages from Saul and Jesus, or you can listen to them, or you can do both, listen and read at the same time. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I retired from flying back in 2003 because I came too old and they wouldn't let me do it any longer. And so I've been sitting on my butt mostly. I did have a couple of years driving a FedEx truck, and 2 years was enough. And so here I am retired and happily reading lots and lots of lovely books by people like Ken Wilber or Tim Freak, or watching Buddha at the gas pump interviews, which are fascinating. If you've not heard, please go and have a look. Buddha at the gas pump, which is www.batgap.com, where Rick Archer has for the last 6 or 7 years been interviewing ordinary people having spiritual awakenings. There are some fascinating interviews there. Anyhow, I've said enough about myself. I'll return you to Danna. Please, Danna.
Well, John, would you mind showing them your book? Because I think
Oh,
you
yes,
forgot to mention that you actually
I
have a
did.
book that people can
I
get it.
did produce a Saul book, and it's available on my blog site. Where am I doing there? Can you
Yeah.
see that? Yeah.
Yes.
And it has been well received, but as it's self-published and only available on my blog site, I've only sold about 150 of them. But it's a self-publishing print-on-demand thing, so if you fancy it, you can order it on my blog site, and you will get it within about 5 days. It's very quick.
Right. Well, it's a beautiful book. I have it, and you may have not sold a lot of the physical copies of the book, but you have thousands and thousands of followers worldwide. And I'm one of them, and that's how you and I got in contact. I called you about a year and a half ago, and we started having some great conversations about Buddha at the gas pump and his guests, and many of the books that both you and I read. You often recommend things that I go read, and then we discuss it. But before we go too much farther, I just want to tell the audiences that don't know me who I am. My name is Danna Beal, and I'm an author, a business consultant, and a coach. Both executive and life coaching are my passions, because I believe we're all here to be restored to who we really are. And I wrote a book in 2000, and then a new one a few years later, and it's called The Extraordinary Workplace: Replacing Fear with Trust and Compassion. And right now, John, I know you'll agree, and everybody listening, we all cannot help but see what's going on in our world, and there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of lack of trust and compassion, and the workplace is another arena where there are so many people living in conflict or fear or anxiety or feeling left out, feeling like they don't belong, and most of all, there's an internal competition going on, not only in the workplace and the world. Everybody wants validation. They want to be proven that they're right. And so I believe right now that the world is in a big transition, and we'll talk about that in a second. But
I
just
totally agree with you. Very definitely it is. Yes.
right. Yeah, we've talked about that. And so as scary as the times are, we believe, and I know many of you believe, that there's a shift going on, and this is all necessary. But
Yes,
I
it is.
start, yes, and so I have a different story than John's, although our messages are very similar. I began hearing messages when I was half asleep right before I would fall asleep, when I was in my late 20s, and then uh, over the many years, I would receive messages and write them down. But in 2000, I was awakened in the night, and this was just following a consulting engagement with 5 or 6 big corporations and speaking with a lot of CEOs and CFOs kind of catapulted me into seeing how much competition is going on in the world, and especially the workplace. And I was told it was time to write my book. And I was given the message that my book is about rebuilding relationships in the workplace by honoring the spirit in ourselves and others that's residing beneath our self-created identities that battle and compete for power. And that ultimately, when we can replace fear with trust and compassion for one another, people everywhere can be restored to who they really are. So I want to say that as a preface to the fact that the world is in chaos, the workplace is going through difficulties. Only 30% of employees in the United States report they're engaged in the workplace. That means 68 to 78% are disengaged. So what we're seeing in the macro and at many different levels is a lot of conflict, internal competition, duality, extremes. And so we're here to talk today, John and I, about how we think we can help you and maybe just make some suggestions or remind you of ways to find love and peace during this chaotic time. So I also, as I mentioned, wrote a book, and I have a copy of my book in case anyone is interested, or maybe you know somebody that's really unhappy in the workplace. Mine is called, I don't know if you can read it, The Extraordinary Workplace, Replacing Fear with Trust and Compassion.
I've read it. It's very, very good. I was most impressed. Definitely.
Thank
Well
you.
worth reading.
Thank you. It's really about relationships anywhere, but because I
Yeah.
believe my main focus is the workplace, but it's about people. So before we go too much farther, I thought it would be nice if we just told the audience what our goals are to talk about today, and then we can discuss each little topic. But first,
That's good. Yeah.
First I thought we could talk a little bit of what we see, because you and I have discussed that we both have read some books, and you're quite knowledgeable about the European scene, and just talk a little bit about why we think this is happening. And then secondly, to talk about our own personal struggles, because to change the micro, I know you and I agree on this, and people throughout time have said this, that we need to be the change that we want to see. So the way we help change the world is as we go inward and work with our own unraveling of our own ego and our own issues and letting go of our own fears is how we're going to help one by one change the world. So we'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about, or at least I'm going to talk about, a personal struggle I went through that I feel like, as difficult as it was, it made me stronger and it helped awaken me more. And then, yes, you were there for me when I called you about it. And then we want to talk about what we think is the solution a little more for each of us as individuals, and then give you some tools that either you have used or I use, or that we're aware of that other people have found helpful. And then I will just kind of summarize what we've talked about, and we hope all of you find this some beneficial moments for you. And with that, John, tell me would you mind describing what you think's happening in the world right now that's making us all feel so unsettled?
Well, the channeled messages I receive and some other ones that I've read regularly point out that humanity has chosen to awaken, to realize that this is not the way to live. We have to be loving. Only love works. Conflict has been tried and tried and tried, and it always fails. We have major wars, and then we have a peace process, and everybody gets very upset, and we back off for a little bit, and we build up our weapons, and we start over again, because we can never forgive each other or accept the other person's point of view. And one of my favorite authors is Ken Wilber, and he does the integral approach to life. And he points out that nobody is wrong. Everybody has part of the picture, but we are so good as humans at making others wrong and self-right. And this, of course, is a disaster area. If you're always being right and making others wrong, you're always going to end up in conflict. We are very bad at listening to other people, because we have going on in our mind the message we want to impose on them and show them how right we are. And so conversation and discussion just becomes rhetoric that has no meaning. We each take our own point of view, we lock into it, and we don't look at all at the other person's reasons or ideas. And this is insane. We need to learn to listen. And to do this, we need to let go of the fear we have of being wrong. Part of being human is the fact that we make errors. We can't avoid it. We are very limited in our intellectual abilities, and we're always going to make mistakes. The thing is to accept that we make mistakes and not punish ourselves for it, but say, oh, yes, I can learn from that. And we have to do the same with other people, understand they too make mistakes. Obviously, if you're a brain surgeon or an airline pilot, there are certain areas where it's not a good idea to make a mistake. But generally in life, mistakes occur, and we should just accept and move on from it instead of looking to judge or blame someone for it. If we can relax and allow the mistakes and forgive and move forward, things become much more peaceful and much more successful. What do you have on that, Danna?
Well, the guidance I receive, and I forgot to mention that I just call mine the 12 wise ones, because it's a wisdom that comes through, and that's the name of my blog, by the way, my spiritual blog. And the message that I've been getting actually for quite a while is that there is a huge evolutionary planetary shift going on right now. And really what we're witnessing is the unraveling of the ego on a world stage. We're seeing we're seeing so much competition and greed and power, and it's always been there. In fact, it's gone on for a long, long time. And right now we're seeing a huge exposure. They described it to me as similar to lifting a huge rock, and hidden beneath the shadow are all the insects and worms and everything that have been there, but just out of sight. And so as everything's pushing out into the forefront and being exposed, it's actually part of the undoing of the ego, so that we can little by little actually ultimately see we're all one. We're all one planet, one family. But before we can see that, they've also described it to me as it's as though we are living in a beehive, but most of the bees have abandoned the nest, and it still looks real, but it's very fragile. And a new world is emerging, a new, better, compassionate world, because more and more people are getting to the point where they're awakening. They are feeling love and compassion. We see that when there's a crisis. We see that when people come together, both in a situation where there's a lot of loss, but even in events when we come together to stand together, a lot of collective energy. And I believe that's what is happening. That's what I'm being told, and that this is the time of our lives, really, that we all chose to be here now, and we're all a part of it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, my message all the time from both Jesus and Saul is that we are love. That is our nature, to be love. Right. And we have hidden that because we're fearful, and we are afraid to love because we are afraid of betrayal. Right. And we have to let go of that. And one of the reasons we are afraid of betrayal is because as small children we were all betrayed. We were shamed for small things, and we grew up feeling inadequate, not good enough, worthless. And so we put on an egoic front of strength and determination and the need to be right. And we have to look within and say, hey, no, I am a perfect child of God. There is nothing wrong with me. As a human, I may do things that I would later regret or that aren't totally advisable, but apart from that, I'm fine. And I must accept that. That is being human. And we must accept that in others. In other words, opening in love and acceptance. And when we do that, I certainly have personally found it, others respond appropriately. If you are open and loving, others become open as well. If you go in tense and ready for conflict, that's what you find.
Right. Totally agree. And I see that in the workplace, a lot of blame rather than personal responsibility. Well, right now, a lot of people are feeling insecure and taking sides or throwing up their hands and being in fear and angst. And it's also happening on a personal level. And so I wanted to share with the listeners today a story that happened to me that actually, as painful as it was part of my awakening and seeing deeper and getting closer to who I am. You and I did the video near the end of May, and on Memorial Weekend, my son, my grown adult son, who lives about 4 hours from here, or 5 hours from here in Washington, had a mountain bike accident and he broke his neck. And just to not to sound too dramatic, I want everyone to know that he is okay. He's going to be okay. He's on the road to recovery, but it's been a very difficult ride so far. But we really see the light at the end of the tunnel now. My daughter and I flew to Spokane, where he lives, and he had a severe broken neck at the C2 level, which is really a really dangerous. Not only is a broken neck dangerous, it's very that particular area often results in paralysis or death. So we went through several weeks of a lot of uncertainty. They finally put a halo on his head where they drill the pins, they call them, but they're really great big, like lug nut type screws in his head, and a halo that he wore for 3 months. Then they moved him to a collar that had a vest. And finally, he came over to Seattle too, and they have determined that he doesn't need surgery, and that was our worst fear, that surgery would totally limit him. So I can happily say he's now in physical therapy. I just talked to him last night. He is very enthusiastic and happy, and so several things that happened. One is we learned to appreciate miracles that he didn't die, miracles he wasn't paralyzed. During the time he was in the hospital, I went through such panic and angst as a mother. Even though he's an adult, I still saw him through mother's eyes. But I knew finally at some point that he was getting better when he constantly called me Nervous Nellie. And most people wouldn't describe me as nervous Nellie, but when it came to my son, I felt and experienced so much pain and worry that I kept projecting that on him, to be careful, and what about this and what about that. And there was a point when I needed to start letting go and recognizing he's a free spirit. He is his own soul on a journey. I need to love and support him, and there's lots of physical things I could do and did for him, but with the help of his friends, our family, great doctors, he really is on the road to recovery. But the lesson for me throughout that anxiety was to learn to get back in alignment with love. And trust me, when you're in a state of panic, that's hard to do. So it taught me to see my son as a separate soul and give up the role of the over responsibility of a mother, because he's a strong, resilient young man that has his own journey. And I'm so proud of him, how he went through this so courageously. So each of us have challenges like that, and it's our inner spirit and connecting with that gives us the resiliency.
And it is very paradoxical, because we are one and yet we are separate. And as a mother giving birth to a son or a daughter, you feel so connected always, and yet the child has to grow up and separate. And this is very difficult for the mothers. The children in their teens have had enough of their parents. They want out of there.
Right.
And yet the mothers want to take care and comfort them and do everything they can for them. And it's very difficult to get a balance like that. From my point of view as a man, it seems, and maybe I'm just strange here, that one does not get so involved in when the children want to walk out on their own. You say, yeah, but be careful, and you let them get on with it.
Yes.
Whereas mothers let them go, but they're worrying all the time.
Right.
I tend to let mine go, and they seem to cope fine. I didn't worry unduly.
Yes.
And maybe I was just lucky.
Yes.
But I don't think so. I think it's just, if we trust our children and give them love, they tend to cope very, very well.
Yes.
If we coddle them too much, then they expect to be looked after all the time, and they find it very difficult to make their way in the world when they do have to move out.
Yes.
So getting a balance is difficult.
Well,
and we understand that we each have our own path to follow. And my path as a father, or yours as a mother, may be just to let go of our children and let them And when they need guidance, if they come and ask for it, fine, but try not to offer them guidance unasked for.
Yes. And I totally agree. It is a process of letting go. And I don't know if it's the feminine nature or just my particular nature, but many of my friends understand how that are, women that feel this, and I'm sure men do too. We see our children, even when they're grown, sometimes still through the eyes of a mother. So letting go and knowing that he knows what's best for him, and I'm just there to love and support and do what he would like to do next, and try not to worry that, it's that worry is of my ego and my sense of motherhood. But he had what, no matter how it appears to us, our children are on their own journey, and we can't even judge right or wrong. It's their journey. So that was a big lesson for me, and it brought me in closer alignment and in trust in the divine connection that each of us has. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that, John. If the solution is love, and we talked about that briefly, but to you, how would you describe love? What is love? Some people think it's a weakness.
Love is everything. There isn't anything else. Love is the energy field in which we exist.
Mm-hmm.
God, source, the supreme intelligence, consciousness, whatever word you like to use, is basically an overarching field. I think the best sort of analogy is to think of an ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And we are part of that ocean always. We never are disconnected from it. But sometimes we pop out like little drops of water and do our own thing and then come back into it. We don't lose our individuality, but we seem to have a new individuality or personality each time we come out as a drop of water and find our way along our path, and eventually we come back. And then the true higher self, the real loving nature that each of us is then aware of itself again. And then we pop out as a drop of water and again follow a path. Where am I? What's going on? And eventually we come back. But in the end, there is only love. Love is the life force. If there wasn't love, there would be nothing. That's how I see it.
Exactly. And my guidance, my alignment, my consciousness, whatever you want to call that, connection to another dimension that's wiser and less limited than my point of view, has described love as our source. It's the reason we exist. It's the power that sustains all life. And to deny that love is important is denying our own existence, because we are of love. And, we know even physically a baby can't exist without love. And human beings all need love. Mother Teresa said the greatest disease is not tuberculosis or heart disease, it's the lack of being loved or needed or wanted. And that's a fear in all of us. And so I just want to make sure that everyone here understands when we say love, we are talking about our source. And I say that in the workplace, and I actually have a new model for leadership that I call the Be Love model, because if what you do stems from love, then all your actions will be appropriate. And so often people just want a to-do list. What should I do as a leader? It's more important, first of all, to see who you are being as a leader. And if you're coming from love, the actions follow. Much easier
Exactly.
that way.
Yes.
And so, in fact, I actually say the workplace is filled with a lot of ego drama and a lot of artificial power. So is the world. The ego operates from artificial power rather than authentic power. But we all have an ego. That's the way we're wired. So let's talk a little bit about what the ego does to block us from our connection of our true divine nature, that we are part of love and that we are loved and protected and surrounded by love, but we block it sometimes. Well, a lot of times.
It seems to me that we are a higher self, a divine being, and we then come in as a human, get born into a body, and we need an ego to run the body.
Yes.
And the ego finds itself initially totally dependent on mother to look after it. And then as it grows up, the dependency decreases to a certain extent, but an awful lot of fear comes in because on occasion it's left alone or it's not fed or whatever, it's criticized, and so it becomes defensive. and attends to take care of us in a human way to make sure nobody else can hurt us or betray us or
Right.
whatever. And what we need to do is train the ego to realize that that isn't really necessary. It's necessary just to run the body, to pay attention to what we're doing, but to let go of the sense that one is always under attack. And
Mm-hmm.
if one is not feeling under attack, one behaves or can behave lovingly, and people respond appropriately. But we do
Yes.
need the ego. You can't exist in this human form without an ego. It's a sort of guiding thing. It's like the autopilot, if you like. You know, you can be driving down the interstate and you're miles away thinking about a loved one or something, and suddenly you get the, oh, this is my exit. That's the ego coming in. But
Yeah.
when you're having a row with someone, then the ego is pointing out to you how wrong the other person is and how you must put them down. So one needs to differentiate between just getting a nudge to get off the interstate or hit the bugger,
Yeah.
which is what can happen if we're in conflict.
Yes. Well, I agree. And I think that a lot of the pain we experience, one thing I do want to point out, I know you'll agree, is our ego is just trying to protect us. It's not a bad part of us.
Exactly.
And sometimes people think you have to kill the ego or deny the ego. No, we just want to loosen the grip of the ego because it's gotten so, the environment, the culture in the world is heated up, so to speak, and all the egos that when we feel fear, we tend to try to keep ourselves safe, but the tools or the strategies we use are the very things that hurt us more. And so, in a way, resistance is really what's causing the pain, not the conflicts we see. It's our resistance to just trusting and connecting with our own divine spirit instead of thinking our ego can go at it alone. What I'm told is there's such a more powerful, greater power than anything we possess on our own. When we trust in that, we are surrounded with love and an energy that takes us in the right direction if we remain open to that mystery, that unknown, to God, whatever your term is for that. And that takes being present, being in the present moment and allowing life to unfold. So, John, let's talk just briefly about some of the tools that I just listed a few that we use, other people use, because we can get so caught up in the mind and the drama and what's going on in the world that we have to do something to bring our focus to the present so that we can actually get in alignment. And I'm sure many of you, we get questions that in our workshops that we've done live, and people have often asked me, I know people ask you, John, how do we connect to that? And how do we hear these voices? Mine, most of mine started in the middle of the night when I was half asleep. I was dictated basically a book back in 2000. And so when we receive these messages, what are some tools that we can share with people that gets us to that place? And um, so one of them, and I'd like you to comment on it, John, is nature, being in nature.
That's kind. Yeah, nature is great. I often go for walks, maybe 7 or 8 miles, and enjoy it very much. And it's very relaxing, and it sort of is good for my body. It keeps it in shape. I mean, I'm not fit. I'm not full of energy in the sort of sporting way, but my body runs very effectively and very easily because I keep it in good shape. And the other thing I like is to sit out in the yard, particularly in the summertime, and just sit quietly, watch the trees, watch the flowers, watch the birds going by, and let my mind sort of just rest. And this is very, very relaxing and easy. And of
Yeah,
course, I started this when I first invited some spiritual being to come in and use me as a channel. Because what happened was I sat back and for whatever reason, I was totally relaxed and the words fell into my mind. And I got the sense that, yeah, it's just a question of sitting and allowing.
mm,
Thoughts will arise, but don't engage with them. Let them go. And you can be very much at peace. Watch the butterflies go by if you're out in the yard, or watch squirrels or chipmunks. Or if you're by water, just watch the water flowing. Some
right,
people find fishing is good. You can cast your line out and just watch the float go with the water.
right,
And it's very it's just a question of relaxing so that your ego feels safe and then doesn't interfere and start reminding you of the row you had with your wife or your son or whatever, or your boss.
right.
And so you just let go of all that. And when
And
you
then
let go of it, you often get the sense that, well, what was the row about anyhow? Wasn't that important? Do I need to
Right.
be right? And you think, no, not really. It's much nicer to be friends with the people than to be in conflict with them.
Yes. And being able to forgive somebody else and say you're sorry, and all of that, being responsible for your own feelings, those are hallmarks of being authentic and not being in the ego. Wanting to win is the ego. And the power that comes in when we're in a natural, peaceful setting and we become present reminds me, I was sitting in my apartment one night, and I was up above the lake, and I was looking out at the lake, but it was really hot, and I had a little fan on, and it just wouldn't cool down fast enough. And even though I was enjoying the lake, it was hot. And all of a sudden, I had my sliders open. A breeze came in and blew right, actually a fairly heavy breeze, and blew right through my apartment, and instantly it started cooling down. And I thought, what a difference between the power of nature and our little artificial ways that we try to control things and
Right.
make ourselves comfortable. Well, a second thing that's an aspect of what we're talking about is silence. And the reason silence is so important, in my opinion, is that that's where we get insight. That's where we get alignment. Nothing new can come to us if we're busy in our mind. If we're just trying to figure things out, we're not available for inspiration and to receive messages. So I mean, there's not much to talk about silence. It's just that we're very rarely are we really silent. We're so often, in our mind and have a lot of things going on. But being in the present moment, again, is a part of all of this. Being silent, being in the present moment, it can be in nature. Other things that help me get to that place are one thing is putting on gentle meditative music, and just to get my mind and my consciousness to kind of slow down and reconnect. And some people like to light candles. Some people even like having an aroma to help change your mood. And so really what we're doing is taking our attention off the ego and the mind and becoming more settled and connected. So I know, John, you're very good at just sitting down and receiving your divine guidance. How do you do that?
Well, as I said, I just sit and allow. And sometimes if my mind is stirring or I'm in a sad mood or an irritable mood, nothing comes through. But the other thing I wanted to bring up with getting into the mood, a lot of people find a massage works extremely well, and especially if you use essential oils for the uh,
Yes.
liquid of the lubricant. And the other thing, I was talking to my fiance only the other day, and she brought up for me, and I'd never thought of it before, silent and listen. They're anagrams of each other, which is rather neat.
Wow, that is great. I never thought about that.
Isn't that neat?
Yes.
So silent, then you can listen. And
Yes.
listening is very important. Most of the time we don't listen. We have our mind rushing, rushing, rushing to come up with the next thing we want to say when there's a break in the conversation we're having with someone else. And as soon as they stop, we're in, instead of sitting and listening, which is very difficult until you practice it a bit. But if you
Yes.
can quieten your mind, then it is possible.
And that's really what we all want. We want to be listened to. I know you and I both have a lot of things to say sometimes, and we both, you've told me I do go on a bit. And
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I did. And you've
that
never
was
forgotten it. I'm unforgivable.
no, you're forgivable. It's funny because it's true. But when we get in our deeper place, we can sit calmly and truly listen, because that's what we all want. We want to be listened to and appreciated
Exactly.
and valued and loved. And so, to me, that, John, was makes me laugh and reminds me to listen. And
Right.
and so that's one of the greatest gifts we can give, not only to our family and friends, but most importantly, our children and our grandchildren. I
Definitely.
have little twin 4-year-old boy and girl twins, and they're just being present with them is more important than almost anything I could give them or do for them. But to just be present and with them completely, um, listening to them and letting them feel my loving energy and soaking in the loving energy I receive from them. So,
Yeah, I agree totally with that because when I was little, I was not listened to. but I was aware of it once I became adult. And when I had my own children, I made a point of listening. And
Yes.
as a result of that, I learned an awful lot. But so
Hmm.
many parents are directing the children, directing them, and then rushing off to work and so on. They very seldom listen, and they miss out on an awful lot because they don't listen. And the
Yes.
children get very upset because they know they're not being listened to. Mother or father says, "Yes, darling, yes, I heard you." And obviously they didn't.
Right.
And the children eventually stop talking to the parents because they don't listen, as I did with mine. I just gave up in the end.
Yeah.
And I got married very early. I was 21. And eventually the marriage fell apart. It happened over a period of 5 or 6 years. And when it finally broke, I told my parents, and they were shocked. "Well, why didn't you talk to us?" And I said, "Well, you never listened to me anyhow. There wasn't a lot of point." They were
Right.
they were rather hurt about that. But the reason is, if we don't listen to our children, they won't tell us things.
Right. Well, I agree with that. And the wise ones, my 12 wise ones I talk about, told me back in about 2002, I think it was, that most people are in many ways afraid of authority, or they want an authority to make decisions for them. And it's all stemming from our childhood. And so how
Right.
Yes, and so I do workshops, and I have people do just a process where one of the questions is, when in your life were you ever shamed or um, treated like you did something wrong when you were little? And sadly, many people have memories of their teacher, their grade school teacher. They can tell me the name of the teacher, the year, everything about it. And conversely, many people say the person that stood up for them as they were growing up was their teacher. But it just shows me how powerful that early conditioning is from our parents, our teachers, our families, and that shapes who we are today. And then now we're in the process of just honoring that little child in us, but also being the adult, the spiritual being, to um, truly be the one that makes the decisions, not this little child that's demanding and fearful. So
Right.
I think we probably should wrap it up. And I would just say that the greatest message I've learned in the last 20 years, but more specifically, even in the last year, is trusting in the unknown. Trusting,
Right.
yes, you and I talk about that a lot. And
Yeah.
describe to me how you continue to have trust.
Well, around about 1985, I came across a book called A Course in Miracles. I
Ah,
was in the Theosophical Bookshop in New York, and it sort of came off the shelf towards me, and I thought, "Oh, interesting." And I picked it up, scanned it, and thought, "Yeah, I'll buy it." And I took it home with me, and over the next nearly 20 years, I'd open it every now and again, read a sentence or two, or even a paragraph, and put it back down like it wasn't the time.
yes.
And then I moved up to New England in 2003, and reading the local paper, discovered that there was a local group meeting weekly to read and discuss this book. So I went along and then started to read it. I was very much welcomed by the group and became a part of it. And I've been reading and enjoying that book ever since. I must have read it 6 or 7 times, and each time it is new. And the whole philosophy, although the book runs for 1,200 pages and the language is sometimes rather convoluted and difficult to understand, it has the philosophy spelled out in about 3 sentences right at the beginning. And this philosophy is, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, herein lies the peace of God. And I've made that a sort of mantra for myself, and I found it very, very helpful.
It's beautiful. I'm a student of A Course in Miracles as well. I started it clear back in 1981, but it's been the source of so much inspiration and my continued alignment with my higher self, my deepest nature. And so I'm glad you brought that up. So many of us are students of A Course in Miracles. Well, I just want to summarize that, John, I really appreciate you being here today. And we've talked a little bit about the worldwide current situation, but it's really about unfolding and unraveling each day in our own lives, our ego, and allowing the trust and trust in the divine to shape our lives each day by being present to it and open to it. And I want to remind people once again, your name is John Smallman, and your blog can be found just by Googling you. And I have a website for dannabeal.com, DANNABEAL.com. It's my business website, but I also have my blog that's spiritual because, in the workplace, not that people aren't spiritual in the workplace, but I also have to be careful not to offend or threaten people's thought systems. This is just my underlying understanding. So I share that on the12wiseones.com, and 12 is spelled out. But you can also find that by Googling my name. But John, thank you so much for doing this with me again. We plan to do some more of these. Please join us, ask questions. You can make comments on our blogs, follow us. And thank you all for listening. So, John, you have any?
Thank you, Danna, for inviting me to have a conversation with you. I've enjoyed it enormously. And as you say, we must do it again. It's been too long since the last one. So thank you very much for
Yes.
organizing, setting this up. I've enjoyed it enormously. And thank you all who happen to come and listen and watch at some stage in the future. We very much appreciate your input and your comments. Good night.